Hi, this is Paul Berry, author, blues harmonica player, and blues promoter, and you're listening to Talking Blues.
So, what came first, your love of harmonica or your love of blues?
I think my love of blues came first, and then once I heard harmonica, just something that I really fell in love with from the very first time I heard it, and it just kind of got me hooked into the blues music, and just love the sound of the harmonica.
How old were you when you got into the blues?
I was 18 years old.
Okay, so not really young. How,
Right.
how did that happen?
Just out of high school, just started listening to different types of music. I think like a lot of musicians that got into blues, like the Rolling Stones and the Doobie Brothers had a song with harmonica on it, and it just you just kind of start going back and figuring out like where these guys get their songs and just kind of dig deeper and deeper, and then you get to the real good stuff, the real Chicago guys, and that's the stuff that you kind of latch onto and just start exploring and digging into. And
So, living in Minneapolis, I don't know if that's where you lived at that time, but in that vicinity, did you have a
yeah,
lot of access to blues musicians?
yeah, it was great. I grew up in St. Paul, Michael, so the St. Paul, Minneapolis area called the Twin Cities, and we had at that time in the late 70s, 80s, we just had a great blues scene here. I could literally go out and hear blues 7 nights a week in the clubs because we were close to Chicago, so a lot of the Chicago musicians would come up here and play. So I had a chance to see a lot of those great players, and also I took several road trips to Chicago with friends of mine from college to see a lot of the great players and on their home turf. So got a healthy dose of blues at that time.
I just wonder, as a person who's 18 and discovering the blues, and all of a sudden figuring out that you don't live far away from Chicago, that the blues musicians are coming to your city on a regular basis. What impressions did you have about the blues at that point?
I just fell in love with the sound of the music and this just the realness of the blues. How authentic it was, and just like it was about life, and just the sound of the musicians, what they were playing, just really attracted me. And I never was a music fan before that, but once I started hearing the blues, I just fell head over heels in love with it, and the whole culture and just the sound of it just really appealed to me.
Which artist were you attracted to the most? I mean, obviously a harmonica player, or is that the way it worked?
Yeah, definitely the harmonica players. James Cotton, and I remember seeing Big Walter Horton in the late '70s in Chicago, and Junior Wells. Just all the Chicago guys really just fell in love with the sound of them, and got a chance to see a lot of them when they came up to the Twin Cities, or when I was lucky enough to go to Chicago and see them in their home clubs. So um, lot of those guys, and then I got interested in some of the West Coast players when they would come through town, guys like Rod Piazza, and so just kind of had that combination of the West Coast players and the Chicago players. But I just fell in love with all harmonica players of the Chicago and the West Coast.
I have a pretty good idea of what the Chicago players are like and what the West Coast players are like, but from your point of view, how would you describe the difference in the difference between, I guess, West Coast players and the Chicago players?
Yeah, in regards to harmonica, I would say, certainly the West Coast players could play the Chicago blues very well. They had a real good grasp of that, but they had more of a swinging style to uh, to the blues on the West Coast that appealed to me as well too. And guys like William Clark and Rod Piazza and the Hollywood Fats Band, Al Blake, a lot of those guys had that style that developed from George Smith. So it was a great combination of the Chicago blues and also the West Coast, kind of like the jump style blues that really appealed to me. But the Chicago blues players had more of a rootsy sound to it, and I'd say the West Coast players kind of mixed in a little bit of that jump and swing music into their blues.
And you would be in the middle. Did you dabble with both sides?
Yeah, I love both sides. Initially, I started more with focusing on the Chicago blues part of it, just because I would see all these Chicago blues players come through and try to emulate what they were doing and try to pick up on anything I could. But I love that sound, and of course, Muddy Waters, and he always had great harp players with him. I was lucky enough to see him several times. But the West Coast players had something that was kind of unique that I really liked too. So I would say I was kind of in between. I really fell in love with both styles.
Did it come easy to you playing the harmonica?
No, it didn't at all. I think most people, most harmonica players, especially of my generation, can attest to that. It's a lot of trial and error. You're putting the record back on the turntable and the needle back on, back on, back on, and you're just trying to learn it on your own and hoping you're playing in the right key. And it's really the only instrument that you can't see what the player is doing. So unlike today's generation where you can get really great instruction online of how to do just virtually everything, back then it was a lot of trial and error, and maybe you could pick up a few tips from harmonica players, but that was kind of guarded information. So it was kind of, I think everybody was kind of on their own trying to learn the instrument. But it was difficult to pick up, but I just really loved it enough that I just kept at it and kind of figured it out the best I could.
Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, we're going to talk about your book this afternoon, but if I'm not mistaken, you you started writing earlier, like you wrote for the your university paper.
Correct.
Okay, so you have some love of writing?
Yeah, I did when I was in college at the University of Minnesota. About the same time I got interested in blues, I started doing some music writing, some blues writing, and it was really great because at that time I was just like a sponge trying to soak up everything I could on records and seeing people play and talking to people. But this gave me a little bit more of an in with these musicians because I could talk to them and interview them for a piece I was writing. So I got a chance to interview B.B. King and Muddy Waters and guys from the Fabulous Thunderbirds, Luther Allison, John Hammond Jr., a lot of those guys. So it was great. You kind of get it kind of in that way and got a chance to meet a lot of these guys by doing some writing as well too. So that's
So
that's
tell
the
me what
benefit.
you remember about that interview you did with Muddy Waters.
It was great. It was a backstage interview and got a chance to go back there and talk to him. It was a little bit of a rushed interview, but it was great to be able to shake his hand and I gave him a business card and he signed the back of it and he gave it back to me. So I've got his autograph still. So that was great. But it was just great being in his presence and getting a chance to meet him.
Same thing. Tell me about BB King.
BB King was just one of the nicest guys I've ever talked to. Just a real gentleman and just a um, really a kind person. And I just really enjoyed talking to him. Very patient, and I was probably back then maybe asking some questions that he's probably heard thousands of times before, but he was answering like he had heard them for the first time. But just a real gentleman, real very nice person.
He just had that way of making you feel like you're the only person who mattered at that moment.
He did for sure, which was really great, and it was just a pleasure talking to him.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was Bill Wax who once said something like, "If the king of the blues is that nice, there's no excuse for anybody else to be not nice," or something to that effect.
Yeah, that's true, Marco. And what I've met about all the musicians I've met over the course of my 40 plus years, playing, writing, and promoting these guys is that, by and large, every single one of them just a really a nice person. So I think, I don't know about other genres, but the blues community has a lot of really great people that have brought the music to life and have well represented the genre.
You've recorded some of your own stuff, recorded a couple of your own solo albums, as well as other recording projects. Did you ever pursue it as a full time thing?
I didn't. I was back. I certainly had it in my mind, but I never did pursue it to the point where I wanted to make it a full-time career out of it. Just the fact that I wanted to raise a family and probably have more of a steadier income and more of a steadier job and stay more around Twin Cities area, but I certainly always loved playing and associating with a lot of those guys I had the chance to see and play with over the years.
It comes through in the book that you wrote about William Clark, but it's for most part it's not an easy life to be a blues musician.
No, that it isn't in any respect, and you see some of the higher level elite players like William Clark and I think you can go down the line with all the great Chicago guys like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and all those great players, and it's just a hard lifestyle, and I think my book about William Clark pretty much brings that to life, and it just you gotta love what you're doing, and there's a lot of sacrifices you make along the way for the love of the music. But you're right, it's not an easy lifestyle at all.
Okay, so well, let's talk a little bit about the book. You obviously became a friend with William, and at one point he asked you to come and live with him for a while. At that point, were you thinking maybe that you would consider becoming a full-time musician, or was it just the experience of learning how to play w- under his tutelage?
Yeah, it was just the experience of learning to play. I met Bill Clark in 1983 when he came up to the Twin Cities and my band opened up for George Smith, George Harmonica Smith, and he happened to be with George at the time, and we became good friends. And I asked him about coming out to L.A. and if I could, and he offered for me to live with him, which was great. But it was solely for the purpose of just learning some things under his wing and just being out there for a short time and having the opportunity to live with him and study under him for a little while, and that's what I did.
And obviously, he was open to sharing his harmonica secrets with you.
He was, and I remember the first time I met him when my band opened up for him, and he was just the next day we hung around. He said, "Do you want me to show you some things on harmonica?" So he was definitely very open, and I think because George Smith had taken him under his wing, that he was more than happy to share any tips he could with any other players to pass on what he had learned. And but he was very very nice about that, and it couldn't have been a bigger help to me than he was.
You know what comes through in your book, and I'm sure people who study, who know the harmonica, it's probably very obvious to them, but the role that George Harmonica Smith played in the world of harmonica is pretty huge, is it not?
It is. It is. Yeah. I mean, George was with Muddy Waters band for a couple stints, and he traveled around the U.S. Quite a bit, and then he settled in Los Angeles in the late 1950s, mid to late 1950s. But he was definitely the driving force behind the harmonica on the West Coast, and especially on the chromatic harmonica. But he influenced many people, and really really that was his style, and he passed it on to many great players like Kim Wilson, Rod Piazza, William Clark, Al Blake. The list goes on and on. So he was definitely the driving force behind the harmonica on the West Coast, that West Coast style.
Let's talk about how the book came about, because I know initially now you didn't set out to write a book about William Clark. So tell me how the book started and how it took shape.
Oh, sure, Michael. So um, in about 1995, Bill Clark and I decided to write a harmonica instruction book, and so we put our heads together and got about halfway done, and unfortunately he passed away in 1996 before we could finish the book, and the book just kind of sat dormant for many years. And a few years ago, about 3 4 years ago, I decided to pick it up and try to finish the instruction book. But I figured there's so many instruction books out there. There's a lot of things on the internet that would be more useful for or more interesting to kind of create a legacy for him and to write a biography on him. And so I decided to just take a 180-degree turn and go from the instruction book to a biography on his life.
Was that a difficult choice to make?
It wasn't difficult because I'd started working on the instruction book again, and I just had so many second thoughts. But I thought a biography would be much more well received and much more needed. I know that William Clark didn't really have the, because he had died almost, well, about 27 years ago, that there wasn't, that was before the internet age, so there wasn't as much, written about him or as much on YouTube and so forth like there are artists today. So I thought that'd really be more well received to do a biography on him. So I was glad I did that, but I made that switch, and I'm glad I did because I thought that it kind of cements his legacy a little bit more.
I got the impression that writing the book took a little longer than you thought it would.
Yes,
Can you
yeah.
explain? Is it just because there's just so many people to talk to? What caused that delay?
Sure. So what I set out to do, Mako, is write the biography, obviously, but my goal was to interview a lot of the bandmates that he had played with, a lot of musicians. So it was about a 2.5 year project of doing a lot of interviews, a lot of people in the industry, that were close to him, like Bruce Iglauer and Dick Sherman, people like that, and a lot of musicians that had played with Bill. And thankfully, a lot of those players are still around, and were really happy I was doing the biography and happy to talk to me about his life. So it was a lot bigger project than I thought initially, and so what I set out to do. But I think I feel good about the end result, and I'm really happy I did it. But it was a massive project to do.
I can imagine. And you knew him quite well. I mean, you were friends, and you would see him on a regular basis. Was there a lot that you learned about him that you didn't know?
Oh, there was a tremendous amount of things I learned about him. I think when you're friends with someone, you mainly talk about what's going on currently, or what you hope to do in the future, that type of thing. I didn't know about the extent of his background and his family life, and so basically I was constructing the book from when he was born to when he died. So I obviously knew him. I met him in 1983, so I knew him from 83 through 96 when he passed away. But I didn't know about those early years. He was born in 1951, so it was just recreating someone's whole life. And that was but I did learn a lot about him, just about how he was raised and some of the ups and downs of his life, and some of the things, the hardships that he went through, and the hard work he put into to where he ended up and what he accomplished in life. So I learned a tremendous amount about him.
There's a sense that musically he knew exactly what he wanted. Like he could hear everything that he wanted to hear, and he would direct the band members to do so. Where do you think that came from?
I think he was so focused, Marco, that I know that in 1967, when he was 16 years old, that's when he first picked up a harmonica, and that's when he decided he wanted to be a bluesman, and he ended up quitting high school. But I think he was so focused on that task that he spent, you know, 8, 10 hours a day sometimes practicing. I remember even living with him when he was working full time as a musician. He would go into the bathroom and spend 3, 4 hours in the bathroom playing harmonica, and he was just so focused and so driven that he could pick up all the nuances of whether he's in the studio or on the bandstand, what the band members were doing and what they did last night, and he just had a great ear for it, and just was so focused on his music that he could pick up all the nuances and what was going on.
What I also found interesting was the fact that he could pick up on all those things, and if you played a lick that he liked that first night, you weren't really expected to repeat that.
Right.
That he wanted it to be different every single time, which is a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, that just floored me when I talked to the band members and they told me that, because as a harmonica player and band leader myself, I wouldn't know if one of my band members was playing the same lick on one song from one night to the next, but he knew that, and one thing that really stood out with William Clark is his originality, and he wanted his shows to be different from night to night, and he wanted the band members, what they were playing from night to night, to be original and different. And one of the things that stuck out in that, I know we were talking a little bit about Tad Robinson, and one of the things that he told me about the book that he really appreciated was that, William Clark he paid everybody in the band the same amount of money. And he said, that's because I want you guys to work as hard as I'm going to work. So you can't tell me you're not working as hard as I am because you're not getting paid as much. And so he expected that same amount of dedication and hard work that he put into his music, that they put that same amount into their music. And so that's what he expected night after night from his musicians.
And he had a lot of great musicians who are still playing today.
He did for sure, and I know he would take on a lot of younger players, Henry Carvajal and Rick Holmstrom, Zach Zunis, guys like that, and it was almost like a blues boot camp. You would take these guys on, in their early 20s and really break them in, and like they said that they learned a tremendous amount playing with him, and it was not always easy, but it was just a great learning experience that they're thankful that they went through. But he had a lot of great musicians that did come through that band. Guys like John Marks, Alex Schultz, guys like that, which were a little bit older, but certainly the younger musicians, he really schooled them in the blues.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly an impressive list. It and like you said, it wasn't easy. You certainly get the impression that being in that band, well, I presume any band isn't easy, but being in that band that at one point worked so hard and like he crisscrossed the U.S. on one tour. He went back and forth twice or something in a
Right.
matter of I don't know 2 3 months. Like it's crazy to me, but you also gave me the sense of what it's like to be in a blues band, traveling across the country in a van. Not
Exactly,
yeah.
right. It makes my decision look better that I never tried to do it full time because just reading that myself too, it's like I have some friends that are full time blues musicians, but I never understood the hardships they faced in those days. Going across the country in beat up vans where the gauges aren't working, they're breaking down, they're sleeping two to a room and being cooped up in a van for 12-hour rides, and it just like you said, the lifestyle is very very difficult, and a lot of times the hard work isn't playing the music. That's the fun part. The hard work is the rest of the day, getting to the gig or setting up that type of thing.
You alluded to this when you first met William Clark. He was touring with George Smith, and it comes up again when he's touring with Charlie Musselwhite. Is it? I know that like somebody like Mark Hummel has his harmonica blowout and he tours with a bunch of harmonica players. But was it more common to have two different harmonica players touring with one another back then?
Yeah, that was very unusual. I know when Bill went out with George Smith, that was a tour that they just did that one time. But I know when he met Charlie Muswat, I believe they were on on a package deal. But usually Bill's band would be out on the road on their own
Okay.
with just him as a sole harmonica player.
But for whatever reason, that stood out to me. The fact that the number of times that he's playing with other great harmonica players.
Right, right, yeah.
I wonder the process of writing a book, which can't be easy. What did you learn about yourself through this process of writing that book?
I learned about certainly the hard work involved in it, and just seeing it through. There's many times where I just couldn't get motivated, and I just had a hard time carrying on. But I just I found some motivation through William Clark, actually, just because he was such a hard worker and he's such a good friend of mine that I wanted to make this happen. And it just seeing through the big picture in the project. It's just the hard work involved. Just it was tough, but it made me realize that I could do something like that. So I never thought I could write a book, but I did.
Well, you did a great job. Was there a point where you could see the end, like that where you thought, okay, now I've got it. Now it's done.
It's that was the difficult part, Mako. I went through several edits, and it's like for guys that have done CDs or recordings before, you're always going back in and wondering what you could have done differently, or maybe picking apart things. But it was the same thing with the book. I would go back in and think I was done, then I'd go back in and do some more edits, and then go back in and do some more edits, and finally came to the point where I just felt like that was as good as it's going to get. You always have a little bit of self doubt, like could I have done something better? But you have to get to the point where you just have to wrap it up and realize that's the best I can do, and feel satisfied with what you did.
Did you have do you set goals for this? Do you have an idea of what you want this book to achieve, and has it achieved that?
Yeah, I feel it has, Marco. I've gotten some really nice comments from people that have read it, that have been inspired by the book, and I think my goal in writing this was just to create that legacy for Bill. I know Jeanette said he always wanted to be in a book, and she said he would have been so happy to have a whole book written about him. And there were some tough times in the book where some things, some things that he went through that I had doubts, should I put that in the book or not? And Jeanette, Bill's wife, wanted me to be honest with the book, and she said Bill would have wanted that too. So it's just an honest recounting of his life, and I think I've accomplished what I set out to do, and that's to create that legacy for Bill, so that he'll always be there and he'll always be recognized as, in my opinion, the greatest harmonic player of his generation and one of the best of all time. But certainly, I think he deserved that biography, and that was my goal, and I'm glad I was able to complete it.
Yeah, well, nice job. I mean, it's amazing when you think what he died when he was, I believe, 45.
Yes, correct.
So, and not that he's the first person to die at a younger age, but I mean, all the ups and downs that he went through, and it's tragic because, there's certain things that he did that he corrected, and things were looking really good before he passed away, and it's a shame that it worked. I mean, that's life, I guess, but it's heartbreaking when you think about the issues that he had to deal with and how he overcame them, and then he had his health issues.
Yeah, it really is, Marco, and thankfully the last several months of his life, he was able to be sober free and make amends to some people that he felt he had hurt. And I had seen Bill 2 months before he died. He came up to the Twin Cities and played, and that's the best I'd ever seen him play. And I had seen him play many, many times over the years, and he was just feeling great and playing as well as better than he's ever played before. And it was just a shame that at that point he lost his life. But I'm just glad that he was able to live those last few months of his life sober free, and he felt like a new man. And unfortunately, the physical part of it, he didn't quite get there, but certainly his mental state was at an all-time high.
You didn't put yourself in the book very much. Was that obviously a conscious decision? But you do mention it at the very end. What was the thought process in that?
Yeah, well, and thanks for bringing that up. I had someone else, a friend of mine, Kim Field, that's an author. He mentioned that too, and he thought that was noteworthy. Um, I wanted to focus more on the book. Really changed directions when I started writing it. When I started learning all the complexities of his life and what he went through, and I wanted to focus more on the story of him, the trials and tribulations, and him as a musician. And I thought that was best told through the people that had toured with him, that had played with him. And so I was kind of like a little bit of an outsider looking in and writing that story, but knowing him well. So I did that with a purpose. I just wanted to focus more on the people that had played and interacted with Bill on musically.
Okay, so now that you've done this and have one under your belt, would you consider writing another one? Or have you thought about any other writing projects?
I haven't. I guess never say never. Writing that story about Bill is a labor of love. Just because I love that man and spouse Jeanette. I mean, they're just two of the greatest people I've ever met. So to do another one, I don't know. I think one thing that kind of entices me a little bit of maybe doing something on the West Coast blues scene, because I know a lot of people have said this is great that I didn't know anything about the West Coast blues scene, and this book kind of opened up their minds to, hey, that was a fantastic scene out on the West Coast. So, but to answer your question, I haven't. That's not in my psyche right now to do that. But if I ever did, that's kind of intriguing. The West Coast blues scene, maybe to do something on that.
Tell me about your playing these days. Are you doing a lot of gigs?
I probably play maybe 30, 40 gigs a year, and just a part-time musician, but I like keeping my hands in it. I still love playing a lot around the Twin Cities, and especially in the nice weather. There's a lot of great stages that are outside that you can play. We can play in the nice weather, but I've really gained a new appreciation for playing after writing this book on William Clark, and I think in the way that how original he was, and he was always moving the music forward. So I really try to keep that in mind in my kind of attitude about playing, and kind of the direction I'm trying to go with my playing. But I still do love to play, and I think about Bill all the time and what influence he was on me, and I'm hoping the book and maybe my playing will influence some other people to keep playing that great style of blues we all love.
The other thing that you do is promote the blues. Well, how did that begin?
Yeah, that actually started way back in the late '70s when I first time I went to Chicago, and I went to a blues bar called Blues, and saw Homesick James, Big Walter, Playboy Bob Benson, Floyd Jones playing together, and just really blew me away that these great musicians were down there playing in Chicago, but they never had been to the Twin Cities. So I I met a woman down there named Jill Arrigo, and she introduced me to a lot of these players. One of them being Big Smokey Smothers, who was a lifelong friend of mine.
You
But I
recorded
used to
with
bring
him,
up,
did you not?
yeah, I recorded his last CD we recorded together, and so I started promoting way back then, Marco, back in the late '70s, early '80s. I'd bring a Big Walter Horton and Eddie Taylor and Sunnyland Slim and Big Smokey and Jimmy Dawkins, a lot of those people, just because they weren't making it to the Twin Cities. I wanted to see them up there and have other people see them as well too. And I've continued promoting throughout the years, and do maybe one or two events each year.
How has promoting the blues and putting on shows changed over the years?
Well, the originators aren't around as we know anymore, so it's a lot of the blues has changed to some to some degree just because we don't have those guys around anymore. But I try to bring in the guys that I really think that are capturing the feel of the blues that I like. And there's unfortunately not as many as there was once was. So yeah, I think it's definitely changed because, like I said, the originators aren't around any longer. But there's a lot of really great players out there that have played with these guys that are still playing actively. So I try to bring those guys up to the Twin Cities when I can, and have them showcase their skills.
Is it? I mean, I don't know about the Twin Cities, but is there a solid blues audience in the two cities?
There is, yeah. We have a good blues society up here, and I think like you probably are aware of, and you've been hearing. I've been hearing from so many musician friends that the blues audience is getting older, and so hopefully we can attract some younger people into the music that we all love. And certainly I see that on a lot of the summer concerts we do. I see those people out there, and they might not know who Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf or George Smith are, but they love the music once they hear it. So I think the audience that we know is dwindling a little bit. It's getting older, but hopefully we'll have an influx of some newer people coming in that appreciate the classic and the West Coast blues.
I always find it interesting, just because I do some work in the classical music world, and when you go to a classical music festival, you're the first thing that strikes you is just how old. I mean, you think blues audiences are old, but
Oh,
the classical music audiences
yeah.
tend to be much older. The players seem to be much younger, and in the blues, there's a lot of young blues musicians as well. I don't know why the younger blues musicians who are so good don't necessarily bring in a younger blues audience. You know what I mean? Like it's
Right.
like I don't know what
Yeah.
the answer is to get the younger generation to listen to more blues.
Yeah, I know it's kind of a tough question because I know when I was going out to the bars in my college days, it'd all be people my age,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's a little bit different demographic now for sure. But that's a good question. I can't answer that, but I know what you're saying.
So, do you have any other shows coming up? that you're planning to do?
We just do an annual New, New Year's Eve show, and we had a great one this year. I think you and I were talking about that a little bit with Billy Flynn and Anson Funderburg and Tad Robinson. So that was a great show. So hopefully we'll get something going for this New Year's Eve. But otherwise, I'll just be playing around town and with my I usually play in like a trio or sometimes a band setting. So
Nice. Well,
okay.
Paul, it's a real pleasure meeting you, and thank you so much for sending me this book. It was a great read. I had heard of William Clark. I have a couple of his CDs. I know he's well respected, but your book has given me a real insight into who he was, both as not a tragic figure, but it makes you appreciate what he went through as a musician and also just how brilliant he was as a musician.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. And like I said, when I started out writing the book, I didn't envision what his life was like until I dug back. But it was quite an extraordinary life, and with a lot of tragedy and ups and downs. But ultimately he accomplished what he set out to do. And at age 16, he said, my goal in life is to become a bluesman, and he sure did. And he took that to the top level, and it's a tragedy that he died at such a young age, but he sure left a legacy and a lot of great music and memories for folks to appreciate.
Sorry, one other thing that did really strike me was when he recorded for Alligator, that he basically did the album and then gave it to Bruce Iglauer.
Right.
And Bruce didn't seem to have a lot of input into those albums, which I believe is unusual.
It is, Marco. I think Bruce told me at the time when I interviewed Bruce that Bill was the only artist that he was allowed to do that, and Bill was very, very picky about his music, and he was very good in the studio. Like, as you know from the book, he would take parts of licks and put them in, or replace a bass drum if he had to. But he was very hands-on, like he was on stage. So he did it his way, and it sure turned out great. But Bruce gave him that freedom that allowed Bill to use his creative juices to put out those great recordings.
Yeah, and so obviously speaks a lot for Bruce, who allowed him to do that.
It does. Bruce was had a big impact on Bill's career, and just couldn't say enough nice things about Bruce and what he's done for the blues. But he sure did have a great impact on Bill's career.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. Thanks for taking the time to talk about your book, and it's a real pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marco. It's great meeting you too.
You take care.
All right, you too. Okay, so long, Marco.